All right, we are recording for our in-class demo for product photography. So let's go. So you can kind of see my setup here. I got basically my light on the side, and then I basically just set up 2 pieces of paper as a background. So one I kind of let curl up the wall to kind of make a non-edge, like a seamless edge. And then I just kind of taped them down. And so what I would recommend, whatever your light source is, kind of put it to the side of your background, maybe a little in front to the side. And so that way you can bounce on the opposite side. So this could be a lamp, this could be a handheld light, or a cell phone flashlight lighting, or a window light, right? So you can kind of, you can set up like a table next to a window, that would work too. So, got a couple different products. So the first product is I got my little Talisman bottle here. So you can kind of see it is a black bottle. It does have like a shiny red logo and shiny kind of plastic to it. So this could be like a good shiny object. So one thing I always recommend when shooting products is clean your product before you take photos of it, because that'll save you time editing your photos. So if you have like a microfiber cloth, this little microfiber cloth, I would wipe it off before you take photos of it, just to make sure it's nice and clean, or as clean as possible. You can wipe off any smudges. I also recommend too, to make sure your hands are clean before handling a product. If it's shiny and you have oil on your fingers, you actually will leave like fingerprints, oily fingerprints on your shiny product. So make sure, wash your hands with soap and water and it'll take off the oil. And so when you're handling it, you're not leaving fingerprints or smudges on your product when you're shooting. And then you can also wipe it off with a microfiber cloth. So the cleaner the product is before you shoot it, the less retouching you have to do and clean up after. So it's a good tip. This one, I'm going to keep it kind of small. So I'm actually going to move it a little bit up here. There we go. And so I'm just going to be using a piece of paper because my product is pretty small. If I had a bigger product, I would use something a little bigger, like a white piece of board, or like a aluminum foil on a board, or like a baking pan, or one of those car sun reflectors. And so what we want to pay attention to is the lighting on the shadow side. So once you have your product set up the way you want, let's actually center this, there we go. What I want to do is to fill in the shadow side. So if my light's on this side, I want to bounce and fill in the dark shadow side. So by bringing this down, here we go. So I kind of see if in the front, I kind of see the red shine pop up. So you want to get it as close to possible where it's not in the frame. And also if you look at the shadow here, you can see how that kind of fills in. So the exposure is not super good. It'd show up a little better if it was brighter. But you kind of get the idea, especially if you look at the shadow, see how much this kind of fills in at the bottom. And then you can see it kind of reflecting on the side there. So before and after, right? And you can move your fill to more front or side or behind. I would kind of stay here or here. And then if I'm shooting this, because it's a vertical object, I would shoot it vertically. So I wouldn't shoot it horizontal like I am right now. I would shoot it as like a vertical shot because it's a vertical shape. If it was a horizontal shape, then I would shoot it horizontally. So once it's set up, do your white fill. And then what we need to do is our black reduction. So black reduction, I'm going to be using, again, a black piece of paper that I kind of folded up. And so this could be a black t-shirt or any black fabric you have. And what you want to do is get as close as you can to the product where it's not in the frame, and then take your shot. And so what we want to do is basically increasing the shadow side, or on a shiny surface, if it's like metal, it would actually show up and you'd see the black, and it would create a black edge. So something like this white mouse. So we got a little Apple mouse. So again, you want to basically increase, you can kind of see the side of it here. You got this little edge of white. You want to basically take that out. This is the before and after. And so that's how they get a lot of white products to show up, is creating a shadow or putting black next to it, increasing the shadow to get that edge to show up so you can actually see a white on a white background. That's very useful. So just going to show a couple different objects. So I got my little Egyptian head. So again, with this one, there we go. This one would be good for like a matte because it doesn't really have much shine to it. It's pretty matte, flat surface or textured surface. So again, once you have your product set up, what I would do is just go through, do one where you fill in with white or silver. So again, watch the shadow side. You can see how it fills in those shadows on the shadow side. And then the black reduction will basically increase the shadow side. So if you watch this side, it'll get much darker when we put something black next to it. And then the closer you get, the stronger it gets. And then for a textured object, I grabbed the lens. So pretty much anything with a surface texture where you can actually see like bumps and grooves and things. So this is a lens, and so we've got the grooves here. You can kind of see visual texture. So that would be a good object for doing this project. So again, fill in the shadow side. So again, you can kind of see the shadows here line up and the product line up on the shadow side. And then increasing the shadow with the black. And so you will see the black show better if you had like a metal object or something that didn't have anything. But if you have something that's like super shiny and metal, it will actually reflect the black when you get it close to the side of it. That's good for our lighting demo. So I'm just going to move this back into place. Give me a second. Just got to move my light back. Okay. Plug in a couple things. Okay. All right. Just give me 1 second. Just trying to set up my projector again. I'm sharing my screen again. Come on, dude. There we go. So for editing, so ideally, like all those objects are pretty vertical, so I would shoot it vertically instead of horizontal so you don't have a bunch of empty space on the side. But I can't do that with my laptop, so that's why I'm trying to do the best we can with the laptop. But I just wanted to see the lighting. I know it wasn't ideal because it's kind of showing a white background and a dark object. It kind of made it darker, but it would show up better. So for editing product shots, so this one was my demo in class last spring. And so this one was a normal shot. This was where we did the white fill on the side. So you can see this is a vertical object, right? So I'm shooting it with a vertical frame. I wouldn't want to shoot this horizontal because then I'd have a bunch of room on the sides that are just kind of empty space. So shoot with the shape of your subject. If it's vertical, shoot it vertical. If it's a horizontal shape, shoot it horizontally. So this is normal, white fill, black reduction. So you can see how we increase the shadow on the left side here. And then we tried a couple different ones. This was a gold fill. And this was diffusion. With the diffusion, it actually knocked down the exposure. Basically, I was trying to soften the light. And so it did make it a little darker. So this is a good one where we can, adjust a couple different things on it. So I'm just going to make a little duplicate, and then open this into Camera Raw, which again is very similar to Lightroom or for Photoshop Express, a lot of similar features that we can do. So one thing I noticed right away, it is slanted. So we do want our product to be straight, and we want it to be centered in the frame. And basically want to make sure the sides of our frames are pretty much equal spacing. So I'm going to go to my crop tool. And you can see here with the crop tool how the lines are kind of crooked. So you can do this kind of two ways. I'm just going to zoom in. You have a straighten tool. So the straighten tool, basically when you want a line to be straight, you drag it across it. and then it'll basically pivot it to get it straight. So if you had a crooked horizon, you can use the straighten tool. Or you can do a manual angle. So I'm just going to zoom in, and if you go to the angle, you can actually manually rotate it as well. So this is the same in Photoshop Express on the smartphone. We got 1.5. There we go. Looks pretty good. So we do notice it is a little off-centered. Actually, let's do 2. There we go. So what I'm going to do is just bring in, so it's basically centered in the frame, right about there. And then just make sure my top and bottom are about the same distance from each other. So something like this is pretty close. So again, make sure it's pretty centered. We don't want your products on the side. You know, if I was delivering that to a client, it'd be pretty unprofessional. And then make sure your product's straightened. So I'm just going to double click to crop it. And so then I get my normal settings. So the first thing is, it is a little dark, so I'm going to bring in my exposure a little bit just to kind of make sure it's the right exposure. And then typically when we shoot photos, it will be, the colors aren't really true to what you would see in true life. So I do tend to add a little bit of vibrance and saturation just to get the colors to how it was when I was actually like in person with that product. So I generally increase those. Depending on how you shot your photo, you might need to go into your detail tab and add some sharpening. That's really kind of up to how you shot it, if you need to increase the sharpening or not. But typically we do want a nice sharp product. And so then what we can do, if you shot on like a background where you had like a t-shirt or a rough fabric where it had kind of, you know, rough kind of issues with the background where it's not super smooth, what you can do is go into your adjustment brush, and then I'm just going to reset it. And so what we can do is we can basically paint, so this goes more solid white. So if it's like a t-shirt which had a lot of bumps and textures, right? So I'm just going to max out the whites over here, and then I'm just going to adjust my adjustment brush a little bigger. Okay. So then wherever I paint, we'll basically kind of make it more of a pure white for my background. And so then, instead of doing it to the whole photo with the adjustment brush, I could basically kind of control where it goes. So basically, I'd spend a little bit more time, I'd zoom in, make my brush a lot smaller, right? And then just kind of paint it in, take my time. If you click and hold down Shift, it'll go in a straight line, which is pretty useful for an object with this kind of shape. So click, hold down Shift, and click again, and you got a nice straight line. So you could basically like whiten out your background, so that way if you had like a white t-shirt or something, it would kind of get rid of some of those bumps and bruises, and texture on your background, but keeping your product with the right exposure. And vice versa, if you shot on a black background or something, you could decrease the black solely down and then paint it so it's more of a pure black, if you wanted to do it that way. The last thing we want to do for products is to clean it up, make sure it's nice and clean. This one I did clean it off pretty well, but there is some pieces of like little fine dust and stuff on it. So I'm just going to go to my spot healing tool, and then you just want to make the tool a little bit bigger than what you're trying to remove. So it's pretty small. I'm just trying to get some fine stuff here. And so if you had any smudges or dust or scratches, you'd want to try to remove those. Also look on your background, you might have like dust or things on the background, so I'm just going to grab a couple of these smaller things. And again, you can click and drag to get like a whole area. There we go. So it looks good. So the key thing with products, make sure it's straightened, make sure it's centered. You got kind of even spacing on both sides, it's in the center of the frame. Adjust your exposure and maybe add a little vibrant saturation. I did an adjustment brush where I basically whitened out my background. If I shot it on black, I could make it pure black. And then clean it up with a little spot healing and then save it out. So I'm just going to open it and save it out into Photoshop. Just 1 second. I'm going to go File, Save. It's already a copy, so I'm just going to save and replace. Make sure my quality is good and hit OK. So I'm just going to go back to Bridge. So in a couple steps, right, this is my before and after, right? So, we strained it, cropped it, centered it up, cleaned up the product with the spot healing brush tool, and then, adjusted my exposure and my colors. And then, I did an adjustment brush where basically whitened out the background. And that's, again, very useful if you had like a really textured background, like a t-shirt or something. I'm going to kind of help clean it up. So if we're doing this on a smartphone, let's get my phone out real quick. So I have the same photo here. So I would recommend kind of show you two ways, one with Photoshop Express, one with Photoshop Fix. So I'm just going to select that photo into Photoshop Express. Sorry, there we go. So first thing what I would do is click on the crop tool, and then I would go to rotate, and then you can rotate it so it's nice and straight. That's right. There we go. So I'm just going to rotate it. Basically try to straighten up those lines. There we go. So I'm trying to get the exposure better. And then I need to center it. So I'm just going to go back to here, and then I can go in and center it. So I'm just going to do that real quick so you can see it. It's hard to do facing the camera. So right about there looks good. Kind of centered it in the lines. Right there. And then even spacing on each side, top and bottom. And then once you go to the next adjustments, it'll crop it. And then I would just kind of go in and adjust exposure. So click on exposure, right? We can line it up. And then go into your colors, add a little vibrance, saturation a little bit. And then you could do some sharpening. So depending on if it's out of focus or needs a sharpening, you could add a little sharpening as well. And then last thing, just go into your heel and then zoom way in with 2 fingers. So zoom in, and then I would start spot healing with the spot healing brush, and then save it out. For Photoshop Fix, this one gives you a little bit more control. So I'm just going to open it up into Photoshop Fix. One sec. There we go. So in Photoshop Fix, you do have the crop tool. You do have a little rotator as well. And then you basically just drag in the sides. So, make sure it's nice and straight. One sec. And then center it up. There we go. And then just hit the check. And so if you want to just brighten up the background or darken the background, I'd go into the light option. Make sure it's set to lighten. And then you can adjust the opacity, size, brush, everything. And then you're just going to paint with 1 finger. So I'm just going to paint around real quick. It's hard to do it facing your way. So basically I'm just lining up the area around the product. So basically just painted around my product, leaving the product unpainted. And vice versa, if you want to darken the background, just click on darken. And if I had a black background, I would just paint it down with 1 finger. And again, you can zoom in and out with 2 fingers and then paint with 1 finger to lighten or darken the background. Hit the check once you're done. And then last thing is your healing brush. So this one does have a healing brush and a clone stamp tool. So you can either spot heal it, or if you want to smooth the background, you could use the clone. And actually how the clone works, it's kind of hard to show you in this one. But basically you tap on an area, you'll see like a little, come on dude. With the exposure to adjust. See this little circle here? And then basically your next swipe will be the clone. So you tap on an area and then swipe to actually clone it from there. Otherwise, I would use the spot healing brush tool. They could just kind of clean up any dust or imperfections on your product. And then click the little output box on the top and save it to your phone. So that one's pretty good. All right. So I'm just going to stop the recording.